Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm pleased to welcome you to the first ever Kitsap Energy Summit. I'm City of Bremerton Mayor Greg Wheeler, and it's a great pleasure to welcome you to this event. Thank you for being here. And thank you to our community members and leaders in the audience who are watching this Energy Summit live streamed broadcast today over BCAT. The recording will be available to watch later, so you can let people know they still have a way to become informed about this important topic. I'd like to take a moment to thank our Kitsap Transit partner, Executive Director John Clausen, for helping to organize the Kitsap Energy Summit, and of course John's staff. I'd also like to recognize Puget Sound Energy and their Vice President, Josh Jacobs, for working together with us to develop this event. In addition, I'd like to provide appreciation to the staff at Kitsap Transit, Puget Sound Energy, and the City of Bremerton, who helped to pull this all together. For this Energy Summit, we've had a lot of interest from our congressional delegation, our state lawmakers, Naval Base Kitsap and Puget Sound Naval Shipyard, tribal leaders, Washington State Department of Commerce, Washington State Ferries, Kitsap Transit, Kitsap County, our local utilities and our local cities, as well as our Economic Development Agency and Chambers of Commerce. Also, interest from our fire departments, school districts, Olympic College, and our broader business community. This event has brought together the most comprehensive cross-section of leadership we've seen in Kitsap County in many, many years. The topic we will be discussing today revolves around the region's power grid as federal and state laws accelerate the transition to cleaner energy sources and net zero emissions. There is no doubt our economy, national security, and the livelihoods of individuals and families all depend on a reliable energy supply. A steady and consistent supply is imperative for the growth and health of our communities. We cannot have a situation in the future where our electric grid is not able to manage spikes in use or keep up with demand. We must be able to depend on an energy grid that can deliver power to maintain what we value: our quality of life, economic vitality, national security, while reducing impacts to our planet. For decades, we have predominantly used fossil fuels to generate electricity and power our communities. Now we face one of the greatest challenges in our history. We are moving away from the use of fossil fuels like gas and coal, the major contributors to carbon emissions, and converting to cleaner sources of energy like wind and solar for electricity. State and federal regulations are pushing things in that direction very quickly to meet carbon reduction goals. Now, we already know our systems are built around the use of fossil fuels. In the near future, we will see more trucks, cars, transit, and other forms of transportation converting to electricity and relying on the electric grid to charge them. We will also see other sectors converting to electricity and transitioning as well from fossil fuels. Our population is expected to significantly increase in Kitsap County, along with the Puget Sound region. More people, new businesses, and more growth will continue to increase energy use also. These issues mean the demand for electricity will continue to multiply, and the supply will need to be there to meet it. This is no small task. Utility companies and others in the power sector are one of the largest producers of carbon emissions in the United States. They are racing to make their energy grids greener and cut their emissions to meet established carbon reduction targets over the next few years. But to make the switch to wind and solar, utilities and other players will need to change how our energy power systems in transformational ways to provide a reliable and dependable supply. For utilities, they face a new reality. They must provide electricity as fast as ever and meet our future needs while using new energy sources that are not as predictable as fossil fuels to generate electricity. Against this backdrop of critical change in Washington state and across the nation, there are major and rising concerns about the widening gap between what energy we have today and what is needed for our future. Energy shortages, potentially impacting hundreds of thousands of homes, are a real possibility because of this gap. The way to solve it will require an entirely different direction for energy grids and power generation. Utilities and others are already discussing this. It's something they are preparing for. But the real-world solutions are not there yet. Today, the panel will be discussing the many issues we are facing in the new energy environment, their impacts on the regional energy grid, and the ramifications to our communities in Kitsap County. In the course of the next hour or so that we have together, I hope we can draw out from these discussions a broad range of thoughts and insights on the issues that will lead to more conversations on the path forward. So let me get started and introduce our distinguished panelists. I will be moderating today's discussion. So starting with John Clausen. John is the Executive Director of Kitsap Transit for the past 11 years and started as a bus driver with the agency 4 decades ago. During his tenure with Kitsap Transit, John has held several positions within the agency, including Service Development Director. John has led the agency with a focus on communication, both internal and external, and innovative transportation projects such as the fast ferry service between Kitsap and Seattle. John has also been a member of the Port Orchard City Council for over 40 years. Josh Jacobs is the Vice President of Clean Energy Strategy and Planning for Puget Sound Energy. He's responsible for PSC's resource planning functions, system planning functions, transmission services, the implementation of programs to meet Washington State's Clean Energy Transformation Act, and PSC's approach to decarbonizing its natural gas delivery system. Josh joined PSC in 1998 and has held many roles in the company, including customer service, procurement, energy supply, grid operations. Under Josh's direction, PSC is working towards an aspirational goal of being beyond net zero carbon energy company by 2045. And I'm Greg Wheeler, Mayor of the City of Bremerton since 2018. Prior to that, I served on the Bremerton City Council in District 4 for 8 years, and as President of the Council for 3 of those years. I'm a lifelong resident of Bremerton, Navy veteran, retiree from the Puget Sound Naval Shipyard Engineering Department. And now I'd like to hand it over to John Clausen to get us started with a brief presentation.
Trying to figure out how to turn your microphone on. I think I got it figured out. So, Mayor, thank you very much for heading this discussion today. That, as the Mayor indicated, I think this is a very important topic for our community and for us in our community to be able to plan for the future, because the future is certainly coming and we need to be prepared for it. So I'd like to start out by saying welcome on behalf of Kitsap Transit. I'm pleased to see how many folks have turned out, and as the Mayor indicated, there's a number of folks that have also indicated that they're watching via BCAT, so there's a great number of folks in our community that's very interested in this subject. I would also like to recognize the Transit Board. The Kitsap Transit Board is the one that basically gave me the authority to move forward with helping with this arrangement, so I certainly want to thank them for theirs. So before we get into our panel discussion, we wanted to provide some context and share some information to make sure that we are starting from the same foundation of understanding and where we are and where we're going. As the Mayor indicated, regulations at state and federal levels will require all of us to take steps to reduce greenhouse gases emission, especially carbon dioxide. At the federal level, last year's Inflation Reduction Act represented a historic $369 billion investment in the modernization of the American energy system. In Washington State, our Climate Commitment Act caps and reduces greenhouse gas emissions on multiple fronts. These regulations affect all sectors of our economy. The Department of Ecology, which tracks human-caused greenhouse gas emissions in Washington State, projects our greenhouse gas emissions will decline as these regulations take effect. The Department of Ecology's inventory of greenhouse gases in Washington State were recently updated through 2019. And as we can see here, 3 sources amount for the bulk of the greenhouse gas emissions in Washington. The transportation sector, which certainly I'm a part of, as well as all the rest of us with our cars, which accounts for 39% of the statewide emissions. The residential, commercial, industrial sector, which accounts for 1/4 of these emissions from on-site fuel combustion. The electric sector, which accounts or amounts for 1/5 of the emissions, as the mayor mentioned. These reflect electricity consumed here in Washington, with coal accounting for the largest share of the electricity sold to consumers in Washington State. Achieving the reduction mandates will require imagination, commitment, and collaboration across all sectors. Even demand for power, or as the power demand increases due to the population growth. As anyone who has lived here for more than 5 years can tell that Kitsap is growing. We see more people moving here from out of state, from Seattle, or from other countries from overseas. According to state data, or data from the state, as well as the Puget Sound Regional Council, Kitsap County and the cities have been planning to accommodate further population growth, more than 70,000 residents by 2044. This is in the middle, kind of the middle of the road estimate for population growth. And with any population or projections, there's a fairly wide range of population growth estimates from the state from 2022 to 2050. These estimates grow in ranges from as few as 4,300 to more than 161,000 new residents for Kitsap County. With this growth, we will need to reimagine housing as our population grows. This is a futuristic image suggesting solar roofs with electric vehicle charging stations may be a common future in our new communities. And we've all read the headlines recently about some of the changes. For example, Kitsap County and a lot of the cities in Kitsap County have changed their building codes such to require additional electric vehicle charging units as they develop. Heating systems will likely be more efficient heat pump systems, and households will switch to electric vehicles. Washington, Oregon, and California will ban the sale of new gas-powered vehicles starting in 2035. Is recent headlines that I'm sure we've all probably seen and scratched our head. Regulators and lawmakers are moving to phase out natural gas for heating buildings and mandating that buildings equip new heat pumps due to their efficiency. And Governor Inslee has said that building emissions jumped by 50% since 1990, more than any other source in our state. Changing the way we heat our buildings has big implications for all of us. And I will add that this is not settled yet. The building industry is suing to block the new regulations, so we'll see how that plays out as we move forward. As I mentioned earlier, the state will ban the sale of new gas-powered vehicles starting in 2035. Automakers have dozens of new EV models in the pipeline. In 2022, there were more than 760,000 all-electric vehicles sold in the U.S. That's 65% more than the previous year. All of these sales create demands for more vehicle charging stations at home and including public chargers along our highways. As you can imagine, this will have a wider impact. For example, gas stations are seeing declining fuel sales. Companies that own gas stations are selling off their properties or reinventing them. Total Energies, a French group, has announced plans to sell its entire gas station network in Germany and Netherlands and focus on building a hydrogen network for trucks and electric vehicle charging stations. Just as the personal automobile is undergoing a big shift, so is public transportation. At Kitsap Transit, we are working as quickly as we can to transition our fleet of buses and ferries away from traditional internal combustion engines. Thanks to grants from the Federal Transit Administration and the support of our congressional delegation, we've had the ability to purchase a number of all-electric buses. And this is just an example of a few. Today, we have 8 battery electric buses and 20 more on order. By 2025, we anticipate having 30 all-electric buses, about 1/5 of our bus fleet. And we are currently expanding our charging capacity at our Charleston bus depot in Bremerton. We are also working to install inductive charging at a major transit center that's under construction as we speak out in the Silverdale community. So buses will be able to top off their batteries when they pull into the transit center and load and unload passengers. If you ever set your phone on top of a wireless charger to recharge it, you've got the idea. With inductive charging, our buses can go further without having to come back to the main base to recharge. And I might point out at your seat is a little battery charger unit, and it's an inductive charging unit for your cell phone, so you're welcome to move into the new world of charging. While battery electric buses are here in Kitsap, we are looking at the potential of a hydrogen fuel cell bus to operate in our fleet. Specifically, we are evaluating the potential for a hydrogen electrolyzer at our West Bremerton transit centers. Hydrogen fuel cell buses are already widely used in California and allow transit agencies to go farther on a single charge. They also diversify our risk so that we're not totally dependent on one source of propulsion. The other nice thing about hydrogen fuel cells is the byproduct of fuel. Instead of it being harmful emission, it's water. Kitsap Transit also uses a lot of diesel fuel to power our ferries. We were the first to operate a commercial passenger service in the Puget Sound with a hybrid electric vessel, the Waterman. And you can see here which transport passengers between Port Orchard and Bremerton. And we are now working towards building an all-electric vessel to operate the route that will include charging capacities in both Bremerton and Port Orchard. We are also working with a consortium of partners, including Washington Maritime Blue, Gloucester and Beaker Boats, to secure a federal grant for the construction of the first all-electric fast foil ferry and supporting shoreside infrastructure. Our vision to develop a high-speed hydrofoil capable of operating reliable fast ferry service on the Bremerton to Seattle route across the Puget Sound. An all-electric foil ferry will make a substantial impact on reducing carbon emissions as well as support maritime economic development in our region. Kitsap Transit currently has a fleet of 7 high-speed ferries and 3 local ferries, so you can imagine what that conversion will do for the environment. Then there's Washington State Ferries, the largest ferry system in the United States. Has a major program underway to transition to an emission-free fleet, beginning with a hybrid electric ferry system and transforming to a plug-in electric system. WSF plans to convert 3 jumbo Mark II vessels to hybrid electric. WSF also has funding from the 2022 Move Ahead Washington Transportation Package to build up to 5 hybrid electric Olympic-class vessels, complete up to 4 vessel conversions, and bring power to terminals in central Puget Sound. And last September, WSF and Seattle City Light agreed to work together to power Coleman Dock for hybrid electric vessels. In addition to land and sea travel, electrification may transform regional air travel. Aviation, a manufacturer here in Washington State, made headlines last September when it conducted a successful test flight of Alice, its zero-emission, all-electric, 9-passenger commuter plane. As you can see, they also announced that orders from Mexico for 30 Alice aircrafts and from Germany for 25 more of these electric aircrafts. Aviation manufactures an all-electric plane for executives and cargo operations as well. And it really isn't hard to imagine a future that will include all-electric commuter planes taking off and landing from Bremerton National Airport. Any discussion of the future demand on the power grid also must take into account Naval Base Kitsap, the 3rd largest naval installation in the United States and Kitsap County's single largest employer. And I would like to acknowledge that we have Captain John Hale, our new commanding officer of Naval Base Kitsap, here in the audience today. So welcome, Captain. Those of us lucky enough to work by the water will occasionally be treated to sites of an aircraft carrier or submarine coming or going from one of NBK's installations here. The President has issued an executive order for the federal government to include the Department of Defense to lead by example by converting its infrastructure, such as vehicles and buildings, to carbon pollution-free electricity. I'm sure we have all read the articles about the major improvements planned for the Puget Sound Naval Shipyard as well as Subbase Bangor. In addition, NBK is focusing on delivering energy resiliency to improve its capabilities to respond to the utility grid outages regardless of the cause, whether it's environmental or adversarial. NBK's goal is for all critical infrastructure to have reliable backup power systems and redundant power. Additionally, the U.S. Navy, including Naval Base Kitsap, is working on upgrading the installation to accommodate the new classes of naval vessels and their energy needs. Aircraft carriers are going from Nimitz to Ford class. Submarines are going from Ohio to Columbia class. Beyond these demands, there is potential for a 3rd aircraft carrier possibly being home ported at NBK. So I'm going to leave this with this thought in mind is, how do we prepare for the future energy demands? And that's what we're hoping to at least start here today and talk about where we are. We obviously know where we need to go and how are we going to get there. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Mayor Wheeler to move us into the next phase. Mayor?
All right.
I guess I will just go down here.
Okay. All right, so let me get my place here. All right, thank you, John, and appreciate your comments. So I think at this time, we're gonna get started with our panel discussion. So John, if you'd like to come back up, let's get started. Okay. All right, so Josh, why don't we just give you a chance to make some opening remarks?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, I just want to thank you for setting up the summit itself. I was mentioning on the way in, we talk about energy every day at the utility, and anytime we get a chance to talk about that outside the walls of the utility or to participate in a discussion like this, we jump at the chance. So appreciate your remarks at the outset here. I think you're spot on. We're in a unique time in history here where we're trying to run a traditional utility and energy company using some of the methods and practices that we've perfected over the last several decades, and recognizing that we need to look differently into the future for how we meet the needs of our customers and the communities and the objectives of the state. And so we're smack dab in the middle of that transition. It's some days it feels a little choppy, but I would say overall we're really excited about the progress that we're making and the plans that we are establishing to help us achieve the goals of the state and for the company and our communities.
Oh, excellent. Well, thank you, Josh, and we can't think of a better person to get us started on this. So if you and John are ready, let's just get right to the first question.
Let's do it.
All right. So, we're going to set the groundwork here. So this is, we can consider it 101, Energy 101. And so the first question is maybe the most basic. How does energy make its way to Kitsap County?
All right, so I'll try to unpack that as quickly as possible, but the way I think about it, there's really three phases of how we deliver. It's generation, transmission, and distribution. And so if we start with generation, PSC's portfolio of resources is really diversified. We have about 2,000 megawatts of gas-fired generation. That's both peaking plants and large combined cycle plants. We have about 1,600 megawatts of wind resources, both contracted and owned. Those are kind of the big facilities east of the Cascades. We've got several in the state of Washington, and we contract for several others that are outside of our footprint. We have about 1,000 megawatts of hydro generation that we both contract and own. If you think about the large hydro facilities on the Columbia from Douglas County down to Grant County, we take a share off those projects, and they're extremely important because they help us integrate all of the renewables that are intermittent, and they help us load follow from moment to moment to maintain reliability. And then we rely on a series of contracts, both long-term contracts. We have about 800 megawatts of long-term contracts and about 1,500 megawatts of short-term market reliance. And so that makes up our power portfolio. And to get all of those resources to load, most of them are remote from our local footprint, so we rely heavily on the Bonneville Power Administration. We like to say we're their favorite customer because we're their top revenue producer, so we use quite a bit of Bonneville transmission, both to move those resources to our load, but also to help connect parts of our system. And to connect to this part of the system, we rely on 3 lines that come out of the Shelton area. There's a couple of 230 kV lines and a 115 kV line that brings power to this part of the grid because it's not connected to our main grid. And then we take that higher voltage and we step it down to a series of 115 kV transmission facilities, which is part of our local transmission framework. Then it steps down yet again to our distribution network, and we have about 26 distribution substations in this area that represent about 107 or so different circuits that we feed out to the different communities to actually meet the needs of customers day in and day out. So you can imagine from the point of generation to when somebody turns on their furnace or flips a light switch, there's a lot of activity at the utility to help make sure that the generation is functional, it's on at the right time, make sure that our transmission and distribution facilities are operating at the right and safe capacity levels to help meet customer needs. So that's what we focus on day in and day out, is making sure that that system is where it needs to be to meet customer needs.
All right. That leads into the next question. So what can you tell us about the reliability and resilience of Kitsap Peninsula's power grid?
Yeah, like I said, reliability is a core tenet of what we focus on at the utility, and I will say that this area has challenges, and you don't have to go very far to see the scenery and the trees and everything that we have known to grow and love about the Pacific Northwest. That creates a set of challenges for us as we operate a distribution grid that's weaving in and out of the vegetation, and so that is a challenge. Another challenge that we face is just growth. How do you plan for the electrification of transportation? You show the chart. It's roughly 40% of the state's carbon emissions. We have new legislation that targets sunsetting of internal combustion engines by 2035. We also have a push to electrify buildings. What does that mean to electrify buildings? How do heat pumps actually help us move from a fossil gas system to an electrified system? We have concerns about all of that. How do we understand the specific circuit loadings when you layer in EVs, heat pumps, distributed energy resources, residential rooftop solar, and all these competing needs? Demand-side resources, energy efficiency, and what we're focused on is really getting down to a granular level so we can understand, not just at an aggregate or county level, what are the growth projections that we see, but really at a circuit level. Where do we see these new pieces of equipment? Where do we see growth? And that's really important for us as we think about how we prioritize capital allocation. So we want to make sure that we're putting money and investment in the right circuits at the right time to make sure that we meet needs of our customers as they change and evolve and grow. So that's a big focus for us.
Mayor, if I may, in listening to Josh, I hearken back to my world, and I think most of us in this room can relate to traffic congestion. And how do we plan for more vehicles, and where are the pinch points? And some of the restrictions that we have in Kitsap County sounds like some of the restrictions that you have in bringing power to Kitsap County. We all are aware of Gorst as a good example of how we're trying to plan for the future and provide for more capacity. It's kind of the same thing for you in your world.
Yep, 100%.
So before we move on, so I'm going to try to summarize. You are planning for a future, and I won't put words in your mouth, I'm just trying to summarize, but a future where we will have 70,000 more people on the peninsula in the next 20 years, full electrification, all our heating and cooling systems and all of our transportation, our entire transportation network. Is that what are you taking that into consideration with your planning, with the infrastructure planning that you just mentioned?
I would say that is absolutely the goal, but I would also say that demand or load forecasting or system planning might be some of the most difficult utility positions that we have. As soon as we complete a load forecast and hit submit, it's already outdated and it's wrong because there's new legislation or new technology that is driving a different aspect. And we're in the middle of that right now as we update our fiscal year 23 load forecast, and we see all of this new policy implication from building electrification to transportation electrification, where we are seeing our load forecast grow significantly. Rough order of magnitude right now, we're a winter peaking utility, and our peak load is just south of 5,000 megawatts in the winter. This area represents about 10% of our overall load, and I would say the growth projections are largely in line with our aggregate footprint. And we, over the last couple of years, have seen an interesting change in our load profile between summer and winter peaks. We're seeing our summer peaks grow at a much faster clip, about 2 to 3%, and our winter peaks are still hovering around 1%. On a long-term basis, we're forecasting about a 2% rate of growth annually. And that's system-wide, but I think that's pretty representative of what we see in this community as well.
All right, thank you, Josh. I did add that on a little bit. Trying to forecast, our temperature, variances, technology, advancement. Those are moving targets. In fact, the modeling changes yearly. So thank you for that. So how is Puget Sound Energy implementing the Washington Clean Energy Transformation Act, affecting PSE and its customers?
Yeah, great question. We have I'd like to think of it as a small army within the organization, really focused on becoming a carbon net zero company, and that's one of our aspirational goals. But a component of that is our commitment to complying with CETA, the Clean Energy Transformation Act. So that means being coal-free by 2025, being 80% clean by 2030, and 100% clean by 2045. And what we've established is, if you can imagine, there's quite a planning process that goes into forecasting and planning our loads and resources. And so we have gone through a series of what we call integrated resource planning processes to help establish what does that trajectory look like as we remove coal from our portfolio, as we see maybe a different profile of our gas generation resources. We're removing large base load resources from our portfolio, and we're replacing them with intermittent resources like wind and solar. And certainly on an average energy perspective, that makes a lot of sense. But that also represents a lot of challenges to reliability. If you think about what's required on a moment-to-moment basis from a resource perspective to make sure that we can meet the needs of our customers. So we're planning this out as carefully as we can. We need to understand the impacts to reliability. We need to understand the impacts to costs. And then we need to set in motion a series of activities that begin to execute on that plan. And there's largely three buckets as I think about it, how we'll comply with CETA. It's really transitioning our utility scale resources, the big, large scale resources, and that probably is about 75% of our activity to comply. But we'll also focus on a couple of other new buckets that we haven't seen in our portfolio before. Distributed energy resources, so smaller local resources, rooftop solar, ground mount solar, storage resources. And the third bucket is energy efficiency or demand side resources. And so we'll continue to invest heavily in energy efficiency. We have since the late 70s. And a new element that we'll also see is the adoption of what's called demand response programs. So entering into agreements with customers, large and small, to incent them to shift their peak usage periods to their off-peak periods to help us. It's megawatts, so investing in resources on the demand side as opposed to investing in new supply side resources. So we've put plans together to help us achieve these goals. We've filed these plans with the commission, and we are actually counting down the moments here, hoping to get an approved plan within the next week or so with the commission. And then that will set in motion clarity for us for how we'll begin to execute on those plans.
So before we move from that, and the alternative sources on the supply side, that's where you're starting to build the resilience and redundancy. Now, will those be backup sources for the grid, or do you foresee those being microgrids? Is that how that will work?
Well, I think there's probably a little bit of both in there in the future. So we are certainly, one of the challenges, and you hit it in your opening, is there really isn't a commercial technology right now that we can point to help immediately replace what benefits we get out of dispatchable resources like coal and natural gas that we have in our portfolio today. But where we are in the process is trying to explore a range of potential solutions. So whether that's alternative fuel peaking resources like a biofuel or biodiesel peaking plant, green hydrogen peaking plant, long duration storage, so something that's longer than kind of 2 to 4 hours or 6 hours. There's some 100-hour solutions out there that are kind of out on the horizon. But there's also an interesting conversation developing with small-scale nuclear. And what does that look like as a part of the resource mix in the future? And so we're trying to investigate all potential sources from a utility scale perspective. So that's kind of the first half of your question. And the second half was with respect to microgrids. We see a couple of joint activities in the utility needing to merge in order to really effectuate that in the right way. One is these distributed energy resources that I mentioned, rooftop solar or batteries. But then how do you pair that with the grid modernization or grid enablement activities that give us the control and the transparency for how those resources are operating in real time and how we connect them in a way that brings maximum benefit to the local system, whether it's resiliency or reliability. But there's a couple of different, there's a resource investment and a delivery system investment that really needs to be paired together to maximize that. So that's part of what we're focusing on as well.
Very good. I think you answered quite a bit, but I'll give you a chance to, if you missed anything. Next question. We have heard about several power development projects in the area, batteries, biodiesel generation, et cetera. How do these projects potentially enhance the region's power system?
Yeah, like I mentioned, that's in that distributed, well, there could be utility scale in there as well, but I think one important point is anytime that we can successfully site, permit, build, and construct anything within our local footprint, we see that as a big win. It adds reliability to the local grid. It offsets potential transmission investments that we might need locally. It certainly offsets transmission investments that we would need to access long haul or resources that might be on the eastern side of the state or Montana or Wyoming. So there are certainly benefits to building out within the local system. I would say there's also challenges, and that's probably have a couple of questions on the challenges of siting and permitting, but we'll save those for later. Also, from a distributed perspective, there's a couple of additional benefits that we look to for the solar and the battery that we have in our plan, and that's how do we help from an equitable perspective create local jobs, living wage jobs, and build out clean resources in communities that have historically been underserved. And so that is a part of our plan. How do we make sure we've got the right resources in the right communities? How do we promote job creation? How do we promote health benefits of clean resources? And certainly, how do we backstop the delivery system from a reliability perspective? And we see local resources as helping complete that puzzle.
All right, so we're going to give John the first shot at this, Josh, but then I think I will want some insight from you. So John, what impact with the electrification of transportation, the ferry fleet, Kitsap Transit, private vehicles, what impact will that have on the local power grid, and how are you proposing to address these impacts?
Well, that's kind of a loaded question, and certainly, and that's why I pointed to some of the slides on what we're doing. We have 3 projects that we're looking at, just 3 of a number of projects to electrify our transportation system. One is the hydrogen generator. The other is we're looking at potentially 2 battery electric ferry boats. You take those 3 projects, that's the equivalent of about 100 to 120 homes with just those 3 projects. That doesn't account for what we're doing for the charging infrastructure, not only for our buses, but we're trying to provide charging opportunities for the community as well. So as they transition to electric vehicles, our park and rides are going to have charging units and things of that nature. So certainly it is having an impact, and that's why we've been talking with Puget Sound Energy, and from my perspective, we need to talk often and early, because a lot of the stuff that we're doing is directly impacting Puget Sound Energy and their planning. As an example, we just installed some charging units down at our facility here in Bremerton, and we pretty much maxed out the cable that comes to our area. If we want to add more chargers, which we're planning, we're going to have to work with Puget Sound Energy to figure out how to get more capacity from their closest substation down to our facility. So those are some of the challenges and that's just us. And as I mentioned earlier, the mandate for all of us to move over, and it's not just a mandate, there appears to be a lot of folks now who are moving to electric vehicles. It's becoming a very popular, certainly with the price of fuel today, but it's becoming increasingly popular, so I think that's going to increase the demand as well.
Yeah. And you know, I'll get to you in a minute, Josh, but I serve on the board of Kitsap Transit, so I might as well have asked myself that question, how can I be a part of that, of those challenges? And of course, I've supported Washington State Ferries' recent efforts for not only to add to the fleet, but to electrify for the new construction to be all electric. So we're part of the solution. So Josh, you want me to repeat the question? You want to take a...
No, I'll just take a swing at it. I think I know where you're going with it. But I want to just hit on something John said, because I think he's spot on. And as a utility trying to plan where this load growth is going to occur, if I could impart anything upon you, it's communicate with us. Let us know where you think these developments will occur, so we can begin to plan for them, because it takes time from the system to design to the interconnection process to getting the right materials in the supply chain. Some of this stuff is not easily ordered and received, and so we really need to have several months and years at times of notification so we can begin to plan the system accordingly. We're also seeing a significant increase in our loads as a result, system-wide, of transportation electrification. And just to give you a sense of how it's changing, our previous forecast from last year, by 2030 we were projecting about 500 megawatts of incremental load from electric vehicles. And by the 2040s, call it 1,500 megawatts-ish. Our new load forecast, which incorporates updated policies and changes to the transportation sector, we're basically double and then some. So about 1,000 megawatts now by 2030, and over 3,000 megawatts by the 2040s. And so by the 2040s, we could see transportation as upwards of 30% of our overall demand. And so that's a significant piece of infrastructure that we need to be planning for. And this is true for both transportation and building electrification, but the electric grid that we have today was certainly never intended or sized to pick up these incremental loads. It was built with the expectation that they would be served with other fuels. And so as we think about reimagining what these systems do and the value that they bring to the communities that we serve, there is a colossal reconstruction that is going to need to take place to support all of the demand. And so that is what we're focused on, is again, trying to understand where do we see the propensity for these growth attributes, and how do we start upgrading our system in advance of the needs so we can be supportive of everybody's needs of the system.
Absolutely. That's why we're here.
Yeah.
We were trying to get ahead of it with you.
Yeah.
And so, and this one's a little more direct. You've partially answered it already when we've talked about resilience, but we have recently seen the negative impacts of weather and physical attacks on power grids. What should we be doing to reduce future risks?
Yeah, so a couple of things there. So we certainly had some interesting events happen around Christmas time with folks attacking substations in the kind of the Tacoma, Graham area. You know, we had a couple of substations that were part of that. Tacoma Power they were hit as well. And I think for us, it reinforces programs that we are already intently focused on, which is the security and hardening of the system. But it is a moment where you need to step back and reassess, okay, how do we lock down our facilities? How do we monitor our facilities? How do we patrol our facilities? And so that's created an opportunity for us to continue to look for best practices to make sure that we're doing everything the right way. We have ongoing conversations with law enforcement to understand what's out there, what do we need to be thinking about, learning from other parts of the country along the way. From a weather perspective, that's a different yet equally challenging situation where we see climate change having an impact on our systems. One interesting fact is we've started to change the way that we forecast. We don't just look at historical weather. Historically, we would look at the 30-year historical patterns. Now we're projecting based on some of the climatology that comes out of UW and others for how do we look at our summer and winter loads. And what that helps us determine today is, well, what's the right mix of resources that we should bring on the system? Historically, just looking at winter peaks, we might not have valued solar. But now, looking at summer peaks, we know that solar has a bigger benefit for meeting our summer needs. So it kind of goes back to how do we make sure that we've got the right resources throughout all seasons to meet customer needs.
You know, recently our temperatures seem to have been cooler in the winter at certain points. We've had hotter spells in the summer. You know, reduced snowpack, if it was to occur over too many years, I could see where that might affect some of the energy, the energy source, or at least the fuel source for hydroelectric energy. Yeah, so those, that was, it's a good question, good answer. One of the answers I thought might be part of it was your microgrids, where if there's a way to detach from your main source and have alternate sources like solar or wind. You even mentioned nuclear. Then you have a separate type of source besides your main source, and that potentially being a way to combat weather, physical attacks, if you have that redundancy. Okay, John, I think you're going to get to ask me a question. This is.
Bring me the question. Okay, Kitsap County is home to critical infrastructure that relies on reliable power, including municipal and tribal facilities and key national security interests, such as the Puget Sound Naval Shipyard in Bangor. How can we, government and private sector leaders, help PSE meet the local challenges?
All right. So, and that's a good question, John. So,
I thought so.
So, and one of the things John and I discussed was exactly what we're doing now. Is we start to have this conversation, get the dialogue going. We establish this relationship as a partnership. So with Puget Sound Energy, and of course other energy providers, and then with this communication and dialogue, we start to share where our growth is occurring, and so we probably can predict and project more into the future where growth is designed to go than you might be able to. That's what we do. There's so much to be added to our comp plans. Even the regulatory part, where so much is required by federal and state laws, there's also parts that we can learn, and we are always learning from our partners about ways we can improve our regulatory process. And so without this dialogue, without this conversation that we're starting today, we wouldn't be able to improve it because we don't have the dialogue, the ongoing dialogue. So, that's a big part of it. One of the things that I see coming from this is this has to be more of a mainstream conversation. We do talk a lot about weather patterns changing, state and federal initiatives, towards a cleaner future. But the part about getting there is the part that we need to all be on the same page on what that might mean. And there's supply side, there's demand. We know conservation and education in that, the need at some point to expand transmission, potentially some form of substation. You use some other terminology. That's going to have to occur. As long as we know that has to occur and why, then I believe our community is empowered. So, and we can be part of the solution then. And so that's, that's the way, governments like the City of Bremerton and, of course, Port Orchard, Bainbridge, everybody that's represented here, several government entities, that's ways we can help. So, and you can add to it, John, or
Yeah, and if
John
I
or
may,
Josh.
I'd like to answer my own question. I think you really touched on it, Greg, and it really needs to be a partnership. We need to work together with Puget Sound Energy and others, because to be able to respond to this increasing demand that we're faced with means that they're going to have to expand their capability as well. And for them to expand in some cases means they're going to have to dig up our road, or they're going to have to site whatever in our communities. And I think you really touched on it, Mayor, when you said, when we understand why, it makes it so much easier for us to be a part of the team, so that we can all work together to help get Kitsap County ready for the increasing demands.
Yeah, and I'd add to that, because I think you're both spot on. I would also add, from a utility perspective, I think we could use more voices in the room expressing desire and concern about reliability. And because we have a lot of stakeholder conversations, and I would say in large part those conversations are dominated by carbon reduction. And there is certainly a view out there that you can maintain system reliability and achieve our goals with wind, solar, and batteries. And I've worked at the utility a while, and have had the opportunity to be in a few different interesting jobs, and one of the jobs was as a trader. So we have folks that are working around the clock, buying and selling electricity to optimize assets, to reduce rates, and to ensure we've got the right assets online to ensure reliability. And then we have operators who are instantaneously around the clock, 24/7, watching the balance between supply and demand and making sure that our overall grid is in a healthy state. We have to give those individuals who are operating the system the right tools in the toolbox to make sure that they can be successful in meeting the needs of the customers. And we desperately need dispatchable capacity, dispatchable resources that are clean, but might be emerging and maybe not fully commercial at the moment. And so we'll need support for taking a little bit more risk with some of these investments to both meet the needs of our customers from a reliability perspective and meet the objectives of CETA in a way that allows us to really maintain a reliable grid, quite frankly. And then a couple of other points. I would just say more engagement. I think that's a way that we can make sure that you're participating in programs that we offer, such as new demand response programs, and that we're maybe partnering in new ways for where to site local resources. Maybe you have facilities that we could put solar panels on, and we'll even rent it from you, and we'll put up all the capital to make that happen. We'll even look at how to turn that into a microgrid with batteries. But we need to know where's the right spot to put that fits both from our capacity issues that we're facing on the distribution system, and where there might be an opportunity to partner with customers that have a little flexibility with facilities that they are managing today.
All right, thank you, Josh. So the last one here, I could almost turn this over to you, Josh, to ask me. So, and you definitely deserve to ask this question. Looks like Puget Sound Energy might have submitted this, but if not, I'm proud that we did. So what can we do to speed up the permitting process at federal, state, and local levels to reduce the cost of power projects that benefit the county and its residents? So I'll go ahead and just take that on. We talked a little bit earlier, broad discussion. Okay, hold on. Yes. So we had a bigger discussion about, why we start this relationship and this dialogue, but to drill right down in the regulatory part, I think with a complex process of siting and building a plant of some sort, a substation of some type, or even transmission lines, what we need to do is actually, so I'm kind of cutting in and out here. You probably don't want to hear this. You don't want to miss this part of the show here. So, but for us, it's learning more about the regulatory environment, learning in our case, what a city's role is. Since these would probably be multi-jurisdiction operations, the county being aware, us being aware together. And right now, starting early in a process, would be a good thing. But for us, I think the key is to understand the regulatory climate, what's involved, learn from the industry, from you, on what can be streamlined and how. We can also, and this conversation is two-way. We can explain resource constraints. We can, it gives us a chance to explain how we do our business. I think right now that we're going to have a lot more of this, so I believe that getting together the sooner rather than later about potential siting locations and what the plans are, time is of the essence, and the earlier we start, the better. And I seem to be cutting in and out on this one. Hold on just a second here. Okay, we're just going to keep on. So, at this point, I wouldn't know what portion of the regulatory environment that we would enter into is cumbersome, and what part has the ability to be smooth and streamlined.
Yeah,
and so,
I think you're spot on. I'll give you a couple examples and thoughts. Our view is that the current permitting construct is at odds with achieving the state policy and goals. So we desperately need to fix and streamline the process in order for us to actually build the infrastructure that's required. An example that we like to cite often is we have a project in the Bellevue from Renton to Redmond. We call it Energize East Side. It's about 16 miles of a 230 kV transmission line that we're building. It's actually an upgrade, same corridor, from a 115 to a 230. So it's just a little bit bigger poles. And we've been working on that since before 2010. And one of the challenges that we have is because it bridges several jurisdictions, we have to go through the conditional use permit process several times. Yeah. And there's opposition. We understand that everybody has a view, and sometimes it doesn't align with the infrastructure that we need to build. But the challenge that we confronted in this space is we had to go through an appeals process in just about every jurisdiction, and it extended the time, it increased the cost, and that's our fear. We know that a lot more transmission is going to need to be built. We know, obviously, there's a lot of resources that are going to need to be built, and if we have to confront that type of experience each time, it's going to be difficult for us to be successful. A couple other examples. We are also worried about community support for projects. There are projects certainly on the east side of the state that don't have community support because there's a bit of a us and them mentality going on at the moment around, well, why should I ruin my sight line to serve the load of the west? So those are some of the concerns that we have is around just what it takes to actually go through the process of siting, permitting, getting community support for large-scale infrastructure builds.
All right, so thank you. That actually gets right to the heart of why we've come together and working with Puget Sound Energy to start to normalize this conversation, to make it more frequent. We have to have the knowledge and the understanding out there why we need to increase our capacity, why we're working towards the same goals. And so, yeah, that is something, even though that's very difficult, communication, community buy-in, that's something that can be worked on. It's something, while maybe we can never solve the pushback, we can at least get the knowledge out there of why we're doing this work. And I'm doing it, we're setting the groundwork for future generations in Kitsap County, a clean future with affordable, reliable energy. And so we're laying that groundwork today. And so that's where, it takes this conversation and then more to come. So, yeah. Well, that is, John or Josh, is there a question that I didn't ask of you before I ask you both for closing comments? All right, so well, thank you both so much. I appreciate it. Josh, I really appreciate yours and Puget Sound Energy's involvement and wanting to be a part of this. Not all the questions were easy. This is not an easy conversation, and so, but I appreciate your being here. Authentic dialogue, I thank you for that. And John, of course, I really thank you and your staff and you leaning in, Kitsap Transit Agency, for leaning in on this really important conversation. We'll have more, and just so folks know, I'm going to kind of give everybody in the room. But first off, I'd like to give you a chance for some closing comments, and then I'll maybe set the stage for the next step. So.
Sure. First of all, I just want to thank you for setting up the dialogue today and the conversation. Like I said on the outset, anytime we get a chance to talk about what we're going through and how to partner with the communities that we serve, we jump at the chance. And the work that's in front of us is massive. When you think about the generation, the transmission, and distribution investments that will need to be made over the next several years and decades to achieve our objectives. It's not lost on us. We run the projections. We know how big the hole is and how much work is in front of us. But I'll say that we are up for the challenge. We are a passionate group of folks at Puget Sound Energy that are, we roll up our sleeves every day, and we are certainly excited about the progress that we are making towards achieving our goals. And we know that we can't get there by ourselves, and it's going to take partnerships from folks like you in this room to help us make sure that we're making the right investments, that we're identifying the right reliability issues that we need to solve, and that we're planning for the future in the right way. So if I leave you with anything, it's an ask to continue the dialogue, to continue the engagement, so we can make sure that we're planning the system in the right way moving forward.
All right, thank you, sir. John?
Yeah, I'd like to just a couple comments. One is more of a comment, and we talked about partnering and communicating frequently and often and early. So I would just bring to PSE's attention that I mentioned when I did the analogy of transportation and your transmission systems, the GORST. And there's a number of folks in this room that have been working hard to get funding to be able to address the transportation issues of that, what we call the GORST corridor. We've got funding. It's going to be designed. We're going to be actually dealing with that transportation issue. And I would bring it to your attention. It hasn't been designed yet, but maybe now is a good time, if there's an opportunity for it to be designed to include whatever infrastructure improvements you guys need to make. Now's the time. Let's get it on the same piece of paper instead of doing it later. So that's for you, Josh.
Yeah, absolutely.
For the rest of us, I think the important thing from my perspective is that as we've talked about here, our future, Our future is clean energy. There's a lot of different angles that are coming at this clean energy future, and it's going to involve all of us in this room. So I thank you, Mayor, for helping us take the lead on this thing. Josh, thank you very much for your perspective on this very important issue, from my mind at least. And certainly I want to thank everyone here as well for coming out and being a part of this discussion, because it's, I think personally, it's a very important discussion that we need to get ahead of and not behind it. So thank you.
Thank you, John. All right, so just in closing, I just want to thank everyone for attending the first ever Kitsap Energy Summit. We hope today's conversation was enlightening and offers some insights for further discussion. And also thank you to the audience on BCAT. We appreciate you joining us. We hope you found the discussion valuable. This live broadcast was also recorded today by BCAT, so check the BCAT website, bcat.org, for the schedule information and viewing an upcoming rebroadcast of today's event. We know there are many topics to discuss, and we'd like to plan another energy summit later this year. So we have an ask of you, our audience. On the big screen and at your tables, you will see a QR code. If you scan that code, you'll be taken to a form where you can give us feedback on today's program and what you would like to see at a future energy summit. If you cannot scan the code, the web address is bit.ly/Kitsap Energy Summit 1. Okay, sounds good. So we look forward to communicating more about the issues and topics discussed here in the months ahead. Thank you again for joining us for the first ever Kitsap Energy Summit.